G'day guys, up next I've got Brian Keller, who is a technical evangelist at Microsoft. He talks to me all about ALM and TFS and Visual Studio, what he's happy with, what he's not happy about, and then we talk about his famous VM, the VM that has TFS all pre-configured with lots of beautiful sample data. So let's check it out. So I'd love to know a bit about yourself. How did you start? How did you kick off here at Microsoft?
Yeah, so I started at Microsoft just a little over 10 years ago. I was hired fresh out of college. I was a technical product manager, which is a fancy name for, I did marketing for Visual Studio. And I loved that. I love Visual Studio, have always loved Visual Studio since I can remember when it first came out.
Okay, cool. Well then that leads me on to ask you, what are the parts in Visual Studio 2012 that you're the happiest with?
There's a lot of really fit and finish things, especially around like local workspaces, that just remove a lot of the friction that used to exist when you tried to edit files outside of Visual Studio. In the past, you would have had to go mark those files as checked out before you can, for example, open a file in Photoshop, like a bitmap that you're going to edit. Now all that's gone. We just compare basically what's against your local workspace against the server, and we say, hey, do you want to check in those files? That's also great when you're working on an airplane, as I know you do a lot, because you don't have to explicitly tell TFS that you're going to work offline. So that stuff is really a lot easier. And then there's also things that are completely innovative in the product, like code clone analysis. This is a technology that came over from Microsoft Research and allows you to look across your entire solution for any blocks of code that look like they're similar. The reason you might do that is you might identify refactoring opportunities. I'm sure you've been guilty, I've been guilty of this, where you copy and paste from one project to another, you change a couple things, you say, oh yeah, when I have time I'll refactor that later into some common library, and then of course you forget about it. Pretty soon your code base is becoming increasingly more difficult to maintain, it's becoming more brittle. And so code clone analysis allows you to take a step back and say, okay, let's go find those opportunities in the code where I can maybe collapse things that are similar into blocks that I can share and have a reusable library of sorts. So those are two things at totally different ends of the spectrum that are core to Visual Studio developers that I think once you get in there you'll find are really useful.
Okay. Can I ask you about the code review?
Sure, of course, yeah.
Are you happy with how the scenarios that it completes?
I am. Code review is one of those things that a lot of people do, and I think that what we've done in Visual Studio is we've tried to recognize that hallway conversations are great, email threads are great, but oftentimes that's not enough, especially when you need to go back and audit and say, hey, was this particular code change reviewed by a senior developer? Did he or she make any comments? Did we actually take that feedback into effect before this change got promoted up to a production branch, right? And so it makes it all in one place. I mean, that's the beauty of Team Foundation Server is that we try to give you the ability to put all of these artifacts into one place so that you can start to relate this code change with that bug fix, with that build that just went out to the customer last night. And by having code reviews, it just gives you one more artifact that allows you to then relate that back to the other artifacts throughout your project and ultimately make you more productive and increase the quality of your code.
Okay. All right. So tell me something you're not so happy about, or something you haven't nailed, or features that you really want put into the product.
Sure. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm not happy, but I would say that there's plenty of opportunity for us to continue and do more. I'll give you one example, and that is that Windows 8, of course, brings a lot of new development opportunities for folks out there, as does Windows Phone 8. Especially, we're seeing a lot of excitement this week at Build with people jumping on board with that, and it's great. We have a lot of opportunity when it comes to ALM tooling for those specific technologies. So a lot of what we built around Microsoft Test Manager, for example, and the unit testing experience and the feedback client, they don't work as cleanly with Windows Phone and with Windows Store applications as we would like them to. So I would say that works on our backlog, and those are some of the opportunities that we'll be able to deliver to you in the future. One thing that you may have noticed if you track the Visual Studio blogs closely is that you're not going to have to wait another 18 to 24 months before the next set of Visual Studio features starts to show up. In fact, we've already shipped the community functionality technology preview for Visual Studio 2012 Update 1, and this contains a lot of new functionality targeted at Kanban in TFS, for example, or doing better testing of SharePoint 2010 applications. And so this is another vehicle for us to get new features out there to the community of Visual Studio users without necessarily having to wait to the next release. And so you'll see us switch into this continuous value delivery model with Visual Studio and with TFS as well.
If you think about checking files into, I think you lean towards TFS, but devs can check documents into TFS or they can check them into SharePoint.
Sure.
Which one should they check them into and why?
Yeah, that's a common question actually, because if you're a developer, TFS is going to probably be a very natural interface for you. Developers are used to source control. We've been using it for many years. Hopefully people have been using it for a long time. If not, definitely you should be doing source control. But people that are not technical, source control can kind of be a little bit overwhelming and complex, and so a document library like SharePoint might be a little bit more approachable for them. And so we've always had that question, because with TFS, where do you put like a marketing requirements document or a feature spec that maybe needs to be reviewed by somebody that's outside of the team and also on the team as well? And so in the past with and actually still with TFS on premises, whenever you set up a team project, you have the option of also setting up these SharePoint libraries alongside TFS. Well, a lot of people are saying, well, with the new team web access and the fact that I can store documents in source control and those can be accessible, at least in a read-only view from the web, is that going to kind of displace the old SharePoint look-aside portal? And I think that's an interesting question, and one that we'll need to figure out moving forward.
So let's think long term, and let's think that they've done a beautiful web UI for checking files in and out of TFS.
Yep.
Plus they've put the Office 365 integration, so it's very easy to put them in and out of that as well, and it's on the same team project. Mm-hmm. Where are you going to put your marketing where are you going to put those documents that are around the product that you're building?
Well, if that was the case, I would just put them in source control, and really those non-technical stakeholders wouldn't need to know that they're in source control. All they know is that it's a library somewhere that they can access, and they can download.
It doesn't really matter as long as they can get them.
At that point, exactly.
So Brian, I want to ask you about your VM, your famous VM. Almost everybody I know uses the VM. It's their easiest way to get into doing hands-on labs in learning the ALM story and tangibly getting a feel for it. How did that come about? Did you just build it, and have you noticed how huge it is?
Yeah, it's kind of taken on a life of its own. It's really funny. I hear from a lot of people, like you said, that are using it, and I'm glad people like it. There's still a lot more stuff that I want to do with it, and continue to invest in it for the community. And really, I can't take credit for the idea of building a virtual machine. Guys like Brian Randall were working on this before I started working on it, and it's just been something that I've been working on for the last few years, because really when you first install TFS, it can be hard to understand what the value of that is until you've actually run a project or seen someone else run a project.
Is there anything else on the VM, like in terms of what's in there and what to be aware of? And
do read the documentation, because there are a couple of places in the VM where I've had to do some hacks to kind of make it a realistic looking VM when you boot it up. And the best example of that is that if I build the VM and ship it on January 1st, and it looks like a project is in flight on January 1st, that's great until someone downloads the VM on March 1st, and all of a sudden the project data is flatlined, the sprint's over, and you're like, I don't understand what's going on. So what I've had to do in this virtual machine is disconnect the time synchronization between the guest and the host. And understanding that means that you'll realize that when you boot it up, that it actually says something like May of 2012 when you boot it up. And that's just so that every time you go into it, it feels like it's in the middle of that particular sprint. So it's not a VM that you would necessarily want to deploy within your enterprise and run a proof of concept against. That's not what it was built for. It really was built for the demo scenario, for the hands-on lab kind of training scenario, and if people want to use it for things beyond that, they're certainly welcome to, but you'll need to get in there and start to disable those date and time hacks, for example.
Right, okay. All right, now before you go, just wait there for 1 sec.
Okay.
I know you're coming to Australia, but I want you to give this and share this with the family.
I will.
And this is to remind you to come this year, because I believe you'll be coming.
Fantastic.
And with that, Thank you very much, Brian. And this is
right.
Adam Kogan signing off for SSW TV.
Thank you, Adam.